Walk out to your garden this week, in the thick of July, and look for the bare spot. Most of us have one. A corner where the spring lettuce bolted and got pulled. A row where the peas gave up. A patch of ground sitting open to the sky, baking in the afternoon sun. We look at that bare patch, and something in us quietly decides the year is winding down. The big planting is behind us. Now we water, we wait, and we coast toward fall. But here is the thing that bare ground will not tell you. It is not resting. Every hot afternoon the sun beats down on open soil. That soil loses a little more of the life inside it. The moisture, the fine fungal threads, the small hidden creatures that turn plain dirt into something a plant can actually live in. Bare ground in July is not taking a break. It is slowly going backward. And the old market gardeners, the ones who fed whole families off a single lot, they knew something most of us have let slip. July was never the end of the season. In a lot of ways, it is the most generous sowing of the whole year. The soil is warm, clear through. The days are long, and there is a whole second harvest waiting in that bare patch. If you know what to put there, and why the warm ground is ready to hand it to you fast, I have 20 crops for you today. Some will be on your plate in under a month. A few will still be standing, sweet and green, long after the first frost has flattened everything around them. And one of them, the very last one, is not really about this fall at all. It is about next June, and the June after that. Stay with me for that one. Now, if you have spent a few Julys watching your garden limp toward August while the neighbors keeps right on giving, I want to say this plainly. That was never a failing on your part. You were doing exactly what you were taught. Plant in spring. Harvest in summer. Put the garden to bed in fall. The trouble is, nobody's business depends on reminding you there is a second act. Think about how the garden trade actually runs. The money gets made in one big rush, in April and May. The racks of seed packets go up, the tables fill with little transplants, the pallets of fertilizer sit right by the front door. By July, those racks are half empty and marked down. A 30-cent packet of radish seed, tucked into warm July soil, does not sell a single pallet of anything. There is no spring rush in it, and no profit in it. So there is no one with a reason to put up a sign reminding you to do it. It is not a secret anyone is keeping from you. It is just a quiet, honest little truth the market has no reason to repeat. And that is most of what we do here. The good, cheap, half-forgotten things that nobody can bottle and sell you fresh every spring. So here is the idea underneath all 20 of these crops, and it is worth holding on to as we go. When you drop a seed into July soil, you are not only growing a vegetable, you are keeping that ground covered and fed and alive through the hardest, hottest stretch of the year. A living root down in the soil is worth more to that soil than anything you could buy in a bag. Every one of these crops does double duty. It feeds you in the fall, and it feeds the ground while it grows. Let's start with the ones that move fastest. The quickest wins in a July garden nearly all come from the same corner of the plant world. The vines, the beans, the things we call vegetables, but that are, to a botanist, fruit. And there is a reason they come roaring out of the ground now, instead of sulking the way they did back in cool spring soil. Warmth. A seed is a living thing, waiting for a signal, and for these crops the signal is heat. Let me show you what that warm ground does for the very first one. Pound for pound, for the ground it takes and the work it asks, nothing on this whole list gives back more than a bush bean. And the reason why is the best soil story in the garden. Down at the roots of every bean plant, there is a partnership going on with a soil bacteria called rhizobia. The plant builds them little homes. Small pinkish nodules you can see if you gently lift a plant out of the ground. And in return, those bacteria pull nitrogen straight out of the air and hand it to the plant in a form it can use. Nitrogen is the nutrient your leafy crops are hungriest for, and the bean makes its own. In plain terms, a bean plant carries its own fertilizer factory underground. It feeds itself. And it leaves the soil a little richer than it found it. That is the why. Here is the how. In warm July ground, bean seeds come up fast and strong, often in under a week, and you are picking in about 50 to 60 days. Sow them right where they will grow. Beans hate having their roots disturbed, so skip the transplanting altogether. Push each seed an inch deep. Keep the row damp until they are up, and lay down a little light mulch to hold that moisture against the July sun. Now the mistake I see most, and it is a happy one to fix. Folks plant a short little row, the way they would in spring, and then the whole crop comes in at once. A big, beautiful flush over a week or two. And they are caught flat-footed, so plant more than feels sensible. Beans do not trickle in. They arrive, all together. Pick a colander full, eat your fill fresh, and blanch and freeze the rest for a January supper. And every plant you pull at the end is a gift to next year's soil. Snip the tops for the compost and leave the roots right in the ground and let all that nitrogen stay where it belongs. Right alongside those beans, get a few cucumbers in. If you have only ever grown cucumbers once a year, back in the spring, you have been leaving food on the table. A cucumber is built for speed, and it is built for heat. Back in cold April soil, a cucumber seed will just sit and sulk, sometimes for 10 days or more, waiting for the ground to warm. Drop that same seed into 80-degree July soil, and it wakes up in 3 or 4 days and takes right off. The warmth you have been cursing all month is the exact thing a cucumber has been waiting for. From that fast start, you are picking in about 50 to 60 days. Plenty of runway before frost in most of the country. Here is a how that pays you back twice over. If you have any kind of fence or trellis, run them up it. A cucumber grown up off the ground gets good air through its leaves, keeps its fruit clean and straight, and shrugs off a lot of the disease that catches up with a vine left sprawling in the dirt. Same square of soil, healthier plant, better cucumbers. The mistake to sidestep is letting them get away from you. A cucumber left too long on the vine turns fat and seedy and bitter. And worse, it signals the plant that its job is done, and the whole vine slows right down. So pick them young and small and often. With a cucumber, the more you pick, the more you get. Keep that basket moving, and one short row will keep your kitchen in cucumbers right up until the cold comes. Now, most of us have a complicated relationship with zucchini, and I understand it. You plant it once in spring. It buries you in fruit for a month, and then by the middle of summer it is tired. Mildew on the leaves, a borer in the stem, the harvest trailing off, and you figure the show is over. It is not over. It is just intermission. Summer squash does its best work in waves, and the secret the old-timers knew is to always have a fresh plant coming on behind the tired one. A zucchini seed sown in warm July soil is up in days, and giving you fruit again in about 50 days, right as your spring plant is giving up the ghost. So here is the how. Start a couple of seeds now, in a deep cell or pot, because these seedlings build big roots in a hurry. When they have got their first true leaves, tuck them in, either into an open spot or right where a worn-out spring plant is finishing up. Let the old one go, pull it, and let the new one take over. The mistake, and I have made it myself more than once, is nursing a sick spring squash along all season out of pure loyalty. Do not. A fresh young plant will outproduce a struggling old one 3 times over, and one small kindness to your future self. Grow a golden variety, a yellow zucchini. The bright fruit glows against the dark leaves, so you spot it and pick it young, instead of finding a club-sized monster hiding under there 3 days too late. Here is where I will let a little of my own weakness show, because I love a homegrown melon, and July is the moment most people think they have missed their chance. A big watermelon needs the whole long season to size up one giant fruit, and by now that ship has sailed. But a small melon plays an entirely different game. The little ones. A personal-sized cantaloupe, a kajari, a small charantes, ripen in about 70 days instead of 100. And because the fruit stays small, often under 3 pounds, the plant is not pouring months of its energy into one heavy melon. It sizes up quick, and it gives you a run of fruit instead of a single prize. Now let me put my fruit grower's hat on for just a moment, because this is the part that matters most for flavor. A melon's sweetness. What growers measure as its sugar, its bricks, gets built in those last couple of weeks on the vine, in the heat and the strong sunshine. July and August hand a small melon exactly that. And the tell for ripeness is not the color, it is the stem. On a ripe cantaloupe-type melon, the fruit slips. The stem lets go of the vine with the gentlest tug, and the whole patch goes sweet with the smell of it. If you have to yank it, it is not ready yet. Run them up a sturdy trellis to save room, and cradle any heavy fruit in a little sling of old cloth. The mistake is picking by the calendar, or by the color, instead of by the nose and the slip. Trust the vine. It will tell you when. Those fast fruits will fill your basket, but they burn bright and then they finish. The next handful are the marathon runners of the fall garden. The greens. And the beautiful thing about the ones I am going to show you is that you plant them once, and they feed you, and feed you, and feed you again. Some of them clear through winter. One sowing. Months of suppers. Let's start with the toughest and most generous of the whole bunch. Swiss chard is one of those plants most of us grow far too little of, considering how much it gives. If you want a single plant that will quietly feed you for months on end, this is the one. Here is the magic, and it has a lovely old name. Cut and come again. When you harvest chard, you do not pull the whole plant. You snap off the outer, older leaves down at the base, and you leave the growing point in the center alone. From that center, the plant just keeps pushing out fresh leaves, week after week after week. Treated kindly, a single chard plant can feed you for the better part of a year. Now, here is why chard is so well suited to a July start in particular. It is a close cousin of the beet, and that gives it a foot in two worlds. It shrugs off summer heat far better than spinach does, and it takes the cold well too, standing right down into the low 20s. So while other greens quit in the heat or fold at the first frost, chard bridges the whole stretch. From now, clear into the cold. Start it in a cell and move it into the garden, and do not be shy about tucking it into a spot with a little afternoon shade. A corner where a tomato would only sulk. Chard earns its keep in those awkward places. The one mistake is harvesting too greedily. Always leave that center bud and a few inner leaves, and the plant keeps its engine running. And a small bonus. Grow the rainbow kind, with stems of deep red and gold and pink, and the plant feeds you and brightens the whole bed at the same time. Kale is cut and come again too. You harvest the outer leaves, and the plant keeps making more from the top. But kale has a trick all its own, and it is the reason seasoned gardeners actually look forward to the first frost. A mature kale plant can stand right down to around 20 degrees. And when a light frost touches it, somewhere in the high 20s, something wonderful happens inside the leaf. The plant starts turning its stored starch into sugar as a kind of natural antifreeze. That cold snap pulls the bitterness clean out and leaves the kale sweet and mild and tender. With kale, frost is not the enemy. Frost is the reward. We will come back to that little bit of chemistry a bit later, because several crops on this list live by it, and it is one of the loveliest tricks in all of gardening. Now, the honest catch with a July kale start is the heat at the front end. Kale is a cabbage family plant, and it would much rather come up cool. So, in the worst of the July heat, start your kale in a tray or a flat in a bright but cool spot, the shade of a porch, or under a bit of shade cloth, and set it out when the edge comes off the weather. If you are in a warm part of the country, there is no rush at all. You can push kale right into late July, or even August. It is far easier to nurse kale through a little cold later than to save it from brutal heat now. Get it established, and it will be the last plant standing in your garden, handing you sweet green leaves while the frost glitters on the bed all around it. If kale loves the cold, then its cousin the collard green may be the single most forgiving green you can put in the ground right now. And I do not think it gets near the respect it has earned. A collard will take the July heat that makes lettuce and spinach faint dead away, and it will also stand through a hard frost that flattens almost everything else. Heat on the one end, cold on the other, and generous the whole way through. This is a green with deep roots in American gardens, especially across the South, where it carried families through every kind of hard year. It is cut and come again, like its cousins. You take the lower leaves and leave the growing crown, and it just keeps climbing and giving for months. The how is about as simple as gardening gets. Start a few in cells, or sow them straight in the ground, and give each plant a good foot and a half of room, because they get big. Keep them watered while they settle in. You will be picking tender leaves in about 2 months, and even better ones after the first frost has sweetened them. The mistake is crowding them. A collard wants elbow room to build those big paddle leaves. Give it space and a little water, and it will feed you long after the fancy greens have all called it a year. Lettuce in July can break your heart if you go about it the old spring way. But done right, it brings the salad bowl back to life just as everyone else has given up on it. Here is what is going on. When the days are long and the afternoons push up past the high 70s, most lettuce gets the signal to bolt. It shoots up a flower stalk and turns bitter almost overnight. So the trick in July is not to fight that. It is to work around it with 2 simple moves. First, the right kind. Reach for the heat-tolerant, slow-to-bolt types. The summer crisp and the Batavian lettuces, and a few of the romaines bred for warm weather. They will not make you frost-proof against a real heat wave, but they buy you the weeks you need. Second, the right start. Do not sow lettuce out in the blazing open bed and just hope. Start your seeds somewhere cool, indoors or in the shade, and set the little plants out as the weather starts to ease toward fall, or tuck them into the afternoon shadow of something taller. The mistake is sowing into hot, dry ground in full sun. The seed itself will not sprout well much above the 70s. Give lettuce a cool start and the right variety, and you will be cutting tender leaves right when the neighbors have decided the salad season is over and done. If you want the fastest satisfaction on this whole list of greens, spinach is it. From seed to your salad bowl in about a month. But spinach shares lettuce's one weakness, only more so. It is a cool weather plant at heart, and heat plus long days tells it to bolt and turn bitter. So the whole game with a July spinach sowing is keeping it cool while it is young. Here is the move that changed everything for me, and I will tell it plain, because it is the honest kind of trick that costs nothing at all. The first year I grew spinach in a grow bag, instead of the open bed, I found I could pick the whole thing up and carry it into the shade on the hottest afternoons. And for the first time, it did not bolt on me, moving the plant instead of fighting the sun. That was the whole secret. If you are sowing in a bed, give it the same kindness. Start it where the soil stays cool. Throw a bit of shade over the row, and keep that top layer of soil steadily damp, never baked dry between waterings. A thin scatter of straw over the row holds the moisture right where the seed needs it. Do that, and you will be snipping tender spinach in about 30 days, right through the heat of the summer. Now, about here, a fair question tends to come up. All these new plantings, what do you feed them? And this is where I want to be straight with you, the way a friend would, because there is a great deal of loud, cheerful advice out there that simply does not hold up. You will hear that a banana peel buried by the roots is a potassium bomb, or that a scoop of used coffee grounds will turn your soil nice and acidic for the blueberries. Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott, the extension horticulturist at Washington State University, who has spent years holding these old garden remedies up to the light, has looked hard at both. And the honest truth is a good deal gentler than the headline. A banana peel breaks down slowly and gives back only a modest bit of potassium. Used coffee grounds sit close to neutral and will not meaningfully sour your soil at all. What actually feeds a July bed is not a kitchen trick. It is the plain, unglamorous stuff. A little finished compost, a blanket of mulch to keep the ground cool and covered, and the free nitrogen those beans are pulling right out of the thin air. Feed the soil, and the soil feeds every one of these crops for you. It was never a thing you had to buy. Let's pick up the pace a little, because the next 5 are the ones for the impatient among us. And after a long summer of waiting on tomatoes, a little instant gratification is good for the soul. Every one of these can go from a seed in your hand to something on your plate in around a month, some of them quicker still. They are perfect for tucking into the gaps between the bigger plants and for keeping that soil busy. Let's start with the fastest food in the whole garden. A radish is the fastest food you can grow. So the seed today, and in some cases you are pulling crisp, peppery little roots in as few as 25 days. There is nothing else in the garden that turns a seed into supper that fast. Because they are so quick, radishes are the perfect gap filler. So a short row between slower crops, and you will harvest the radishes long before the neighbors need the room. Some folks even sow radish seed right alongside slow-to-sprout carrots. The radishes come up first and mark the row for you, and they are up and gone before the carrots need the space. The how is easy. So straight into the ground, a ½ inch deep. Keep them watered, and this is the one real mistake to avoid. Thin them. A radish crowded up against its neighbors will make all leaf and no root. Give each seedling an inch of room, and you will grow a proper radish instead of a fistful of greens. Keep them growing fast and steady on plenty of water. A radish that grows slow and thirsty turns woody and fiery hot, fast and cool and crisp. That is the whole art of it. Arugula is radish fast for the salad bowl. You can be cutting tender, peppery baby leaves in about 3 weeks, and full-sized ones not long after. It is a cut-and-come-again green too. You snip the outer leaves and it keeps right on giving. And here is the good news for a fall sowing in particular. Arugula actually prefers the cooling weather. The same heat that makes it bolt and turn sharp and bitter in the middle of summer eases off as you head toward fall, and the leaves come in milder and sweeter. So in arugula sowing now, time to mature into the cool, is arugula at its very best. Sow it thinly, straight in the ground, keep it damp, and give it a bit of afternoon shade while the weather is still hot. The mistake is letting it sit too long once it is up. Old arugula and warm weather both push it toward that hot, bitter, going to flower flavor. Cut it young, cut it often, and sow a fresh pinch every couple of weeks. Do that, and you will have a steady supply of one of the liveliest greens there is. Bok choy is the quiet overachiever of the fall garden, a cabbage family green that grows up with none of the long wait that cabbage usually asks of you. Baby bok choy is ready in about a month, the full-sized heads not long after. Crisp white stems, tender green leaves, and a mild, sweet flavor that takes beautifully to a quick sauté. Like all of the cabbage family, bok choy would far rather grow cool than hot, which makes a late July or August sowing, timed into the cooling weather, just about ideal. It also handles a light frost, and like its cousins, a touch of cold only sweetens it. Sow it in cells, or straight in the ground, and keep it watered and growing steadily. That is the real key with this one. The mistake with any of these fast cabbage family crops is letting them get stressed and thirsty, which can push them to bolt early and go to flower on you. Keep bok choy cool and moist and moving, and in a month you have got a crop most folks never think to grow at home, and wonder why not once they taste it fresh from the garden. Green onions, scallions, are one of the most useful and forgiving things you can tuck into any spare inch of a July garden. They ask for almost no room. They stand a good deal of both heat and cold, and they are ready to start snipping in about 60 days from seed, sooner still if you start from a few little sets. Here is the trick most folks miss, and it is a lovely one. When you harvest a green onion, do not pull the whole thing. Snip it off with scissors an inch above the soil, and leave the roots right where they are. In a great many cases, that little stub will sprout and grow you a second, and even a third, harvest from the very same plant. Cut and come again, allium style. Sow them in a thin little band, thin as thread, and do not fuss much about spacing them, because you actually want them close. Keep them watered, and snip as you need them for the kitchen. There is really no mistake to make here, beyond forgetting to plant them in the first place. A little ribbon of green onions along the edge of a bed is one of those small, steady pleasures. Always something fresh to snip for the pot, all fall long. Let's close out the fast crops with the turnip. An old, humble, and deeply underrated vegetable that gives you 2 harvests from a single sowing and gets sweeter as the weather turns. Most people plant a turnip for the root and never once think about the top half. That is half the harvest thrown away. Turnip greens are tender and tasty, and every bit as good for you as the fancy greens are. And you can start snipping a few of them while the roots are still sizing up down below. 2 crops, 1 seed. The how is straightforward, so straight into the ground. Turnips, like most roots, do not care to be transplanted. Keep them watered and thin the seedlings so each root has room to swell. They are fast, giving you roots in around 50 days. And here is the payoff worth waiting for. Just like the carrots we will get to in a minute, a turnip left in the ground through a frost turns from sharp to sweet and mild. The mistake is pulling them in the summer heat, when they are at their most peppery, tasting one, and deciding you just do not care for turnips. Let the cold do its work first, then taste one. You may change your mind entirely. Now, that is a lot of crops, a lot of days to harvest, a lot of which ones go where. So we have gathered every bit of it. All 20 crops, how many days each one takes, which to sow straight in the ground and which to start in a tray, and the honest notes on timing. Onto a single page you can print out and tape inside the shed door or tuck into your garden journal. Point your phone at the code on the screen, and it is yours. No charge, nothing to sign up for. Just a friend handing a neighbor a planting list over the fence. Then stay right here, because the next few crops are, to my mind, the best-kept secret of the whole fall garden. These are the ones that do not just survive the first frost. They wait for it, because the cold is exactly what turns them to candy. And that is not a folktale. It is real chemistry, and I will show you just how it works. I mentioned this little bit of plant chemistry back with the kale, and now I want to give it to you in full, because once you understand it, you will never again see a fall frost as something to dread. For a whole group of crops, that first cold snap is not damage. It is the finishing touch, the moment they get sweet. A carrot sown now, in July, sets you up for a fall crop that tastes sweeter than anything you will ever buy in a store. And here is the science, because it is genuinely lovely. All season long, a carrot stores its energy as starch, down in that root. But when the nights turn cold, the plant does something clever to keep from freezing. It breaks some of that starch down into sugar, mostly glucose and fructose. And those sugars work like a natural antifreeze, lowering the freezing point inside the carrot cells so they do not turn to ice. Plant scientists call it cold-sweetening, and researchers at the University of Wisconsin have laid it out clearly. The carrot is only trying to survive the cold. But the happy side effect, for you, is a root that gets noticeably, deliciously sweeter after a frost. And here is the honest part, worth saying right out loud. That sweetness is the plant's own doing. You do not need to bury eggshells for it, or scratch in Epsom salt, or water it with sugar. None of that puts sweetness into a carrot. The cold does. And it does it for free. Now, carrots have a reputation for being fussy to start, and it costs a lot of gardeners the crop. The fix is simple, once you know it. Carrot seed needs steady moisture for up to 3 weeks to germinate, and July soil dries out fast. So after you sow, straight in the ground, shallow, because carrots hate being transplanted. Keep that surface damp. Lay a board flat over the row, or a light scatter of straw to hold the moisture in. Check under it every day after the first week, and the very moment you see the little green threads coming up, pull the board off. That one habit, never letting the seedbed dry out, is the whole secret to a thick, sweet stand of carrots. Then wait for that first cold snap and pull the sweetest carrots you have ever grown. A beet sown in July loves the cooling run into fall, and it uses that very same cold sweetening trick the carrot does. But it comes with a bonus that most people walk right past. Here is the clever thing first, because it surprises nearly everyone. What you think of as a single beet seed is usually no such thing. It is a little dried cluster. Several seeds fused together in one knobbly ball. Plant one, and you will often get 2, 3, even 5 seedlings coming up in a bunch, which means you have to thin them, so each root has room to swell. But those thinnings are not trash. The tender young leaves you pull are beet greens, and they are delicious. Every bit as good for you as the root itself. So before you have harvested a single beet, you are already eating from the plant. 2 crops, 1 seed. When you thin, do not yank. You will disturb the roots you mean to keep. Just snip or pinch the extra greens off at soil level and toss them in a salad. Then let the rest size up down below. So straight in the ground, keep them watered, and reach for a faster variety if your fall runs short. And like the carrot, a beet left in the ground to catch a frost or two comes out sweeter and earthier and better than any beet the summer heat ever gave you. Broccoli is the one on this list that a lot of folks would never in 100 years think to plant in July. And it may just be the biggest payoff of the whole bunch, because broccoli is a fall crop at heart. A broccoli head that matures into the cool, crisp days of autumn is sweeter and tighter and finer than anything the heat of spring can produce. It uses the cold sweetening trick too. A light frost turns the whole head mild and sweet, and a fall crop sidesteps a lot of the pests and a lot of the bolting that plague spring broccoli, when one sudden hot spell can make the heads open up and flower before you have even had the chance to cut them. Here is the how, and the timing matters on this one. Broccoli takes longer than our fast crops. Figure a couple of months from a transplant to a full head. So this is one to start now and set out as young plants. Start the seeds in a cool, bright spot, away from the worst of the heat, and move the little plants into rich, well-fed soil, giving each one a good 1.5 feet of room. The mistake is starting too late and running out of season, or letting a heat-stressed seedling sit and sulk instead of growing. Get sturdy plants going now, and here is the part people do not expect. After you cut that main head, most kinds keep right on throwing smaller side shoots for weeks. One planting, one big crown, and then a long, generous tail of little ones to follow. We have had the fast crops and the frost-sweet ones. Now for the long-haul crops. The ones that ask you for a little patience and pay you back for months. These are the storage vegetables, the ones the old farmers grew not for the table this week, but for the root cellar and the January shelf. Plant them now, in the warm heart of summer, and you are really planting for the cold months ahead. And the very last one of all is planting for something further off than that. If you are only going to grow one winter squash, make it a butternut. And let me tell you a real advantage of it that hardly anyone ever mentions. Butternut belongs to a species the botanists call Cucurbita machata, and that species has a solid stem. Now, that matters far more than it sounds, because of a pest called the squash vine borer. The The one that hollows out and kills so many zucchini and pumpkin plants in the middle of summer, leaving a big, healthy vine suddenly wilted and dead. The borer gets in through soft, hollow stems. The entomologists at Ohio State University Extension put it plainly. The moth rarely even bothers to lay its eggs on a butternut, and the few larvae that do try usually cannot survive in that solid stem. So while your other squash are under attack, the butternut mostly shrugs the whole thing off. And that same species handles summer heat better than most. Besides, it is a tough, forgiving plant. Here is the how. A butternut takes around 90 to 100 days, so a July start ripens it right as the cool weather comes rolling in. Give it room to run, keep it watered while the fruit swells, and here is the one step most home gardeners skip. Cure it. After you cut it, let it sit about a week to 10 days somewhere warm and dry to harden the skin. That cured skin is exactly what lets a butternut keep for months in a cool basement or garage. Plant it now, and you are looking at squash on the shelf in January, long after the garden has gone to sleep. That is about as close to insurance as a garden ever gets. Here is the one that nobody warns you about in time. If you want a pumpkin sitting on your porch the very moment you start thinking about pumpkins, which is to say, come Halloween, you have to plant it right now, in July. There is no shortcut. A pumpkin needs roughly 90 to 110 days to ripen, so if you count backward from the end of October, you land squarely in July. Miss that window, and you will be buying your jack-o'-lantern off a pallet at the store instead of cutting it from your own vine. Now, an honest word about where you live, because it truly matters here. If you are in a warm part of the country, you have got plenty of runway. Plant with confidence. If your falls come early and cold, you are cutting it close, so choose a smaller, faster variety and get your seeds in early in the month. A good way to plan any of these long crops is to look up your average first frost date. The Old Farmer's Almanac and your county extension office both keep honest tables, and then simply count back the days the crop needs. Give a pumpkin plenty of room to sprawl, keep the water steady while the fruit sizes up, and leave a few inches of stem on when you cut it, so it keeps well on the porch. One healthy plant gives you 3 to 5 carving pumpkins, so you do not need many. And there is nothing quite like carrying in a pumpkin you grew yourself and watching a grandchild's face light up over it. That is a harvest you feel, not just one you eat. And here is the last one. The crop I told you at the very start was not really about this fall at all. Strawberries. Now, most folks think of strawberries as a spring planting, and the everyday June-bearing kind mostly is. But there is another type, called day neutral, that changes the whole game. And it is the one to think about now. A day-neutral strawberry does not wait for the long days of spring to set fruit. As long as the weather holds between about 40 and 85 degrees, it just keeps flowering and fruiting. Planted in the warm heart of summer, on a bed mulched to keep the roots cool, keep it well watered while it settles in, and it will give you its first berries in about 10 weeks. A modest little handful this fall. But here is where I will be honest with you, the way we always try to be, because the honesty is the whole point. That first fall crop is small. The real gift comes later. This is a perennial. You plant it once, and it comes back. Nurse it through its first winter under a good blanket of straw, and next June, and the June after that, that little patch pays you back in earnest, with more berries than the first year could ever dream of. Gardeners have an old saying about fruit that is worth carrying with you. The first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year, it leaps. So this last one asks something a little different of you. Not a quick harvest, but a little faith. You are kneeling down in the July heat, tucking in a plant whose best gift is years down the road, for the you of next summer and the summers after that. Which, when you stop and think about it, is what the very best gardening has always been. Let's go back to where we started. That bare patch of ground in the middle of July. The one baking in the afternoon sun. The one that made you feel, just a little, like the season was slipping away from you. I want you to see it differently now, because you and I both know what it really is. It is not the end of anything. It is an opening. It is 20 crops worth of suppers, waiting. It is radishes in 3 weeks, and carrots sweetened by the first frost, and a strawberry patch that will be feeding your family long after you have forgotten which July you first planted it. I spent a lot of years myself treating July as a kind of finish line, coasting, waiting on fall, letting the beds go quiet and bare. It took me longer than I would like to admit to understand that the ground was never once asking me to stop. It was asking me to keep it company, to keep something living in it. Because a handful of soil with a root growing through it is alive and working and building itself richer by the day, while a bare handful, baking in the sun, is only getting poorer. Every seed you push into that warm ground this month is a small act of tending, not just of a plant, but of the living soil underneath it. That soil has fed gardeners for as long as there have been gardeners at all, and it will go right on feeding the ones who remember to feed it back. If that is the kind of gardening you come from, or the kind you would like to grow into, then you already belong here, at this fence, with the rest of us who never quite bought the idea that the good stuff has to come in a bag. Subscribe, and let's keep tending the old, honest way, together. There is always another season coming, and there is always something worth putting in the ground. Evergreen July 20th crops, YouTube description TXT. That bare patch in your July garden isn't resting. It's quietly going backward. Here are 20 crops to plant right now for a second harvest that runs long past the first frost. Most of us treat July like the end of the gardening year. It isn't. It's the most generous second sowing of the whole season. The soil is warm clear through, the days are long, and that bare ground is ready to hand you a full fall harvest fast, if you know what to put there and why. In this one, we walk through 20 of the most productive crops to plant now. From beans that feed the soil while they feed you, to roots that turn sweet as candy after the first frost, to a strawberry patch that pays you back next June. No fabricated numbers, no miracle cures. Just honest, soil-first gardening the old county extension way.